Okay, so we're back here with the second video in the series on the Vienna game. Just as a reminder, the Vienna game starts with white playing e4, black goes e5, and then white plays this very uncommon knight c3, which, as I mentioned last time, has this great virtue that the the most common move that white plays here, knight f3, is something like 22 times more common than knight c3. Black hardly ever sees knight c3, so you're going to be throwing a lot of people off when you play knight c3. As we mentioned last time, black does have a few tries here, most notably knight f6, also knight c6, and bishop c5 are strong. D6 has some play too, but then some of these other moves get a little questionable. Last time we started with what I think is the strongest move for white, and also the most common, or sorry, the strongest move for black, and also the most common move for black, which is knight f6. And so in this video, we're going to continue on with some ideas, and we're going to actually get to why I would recommend, if you are playing the black side of this, to go with knight f6, because black can generate some positions which might make white feel uncomfortable. They come up rarely, but we will mention them because they are things you want to be aware of. So again, my suggestion is to go f4. And as we talked about last time, at the club level, the most common reply here is e takes f4. And as I mentioned last time, I would say that this is an inaccurate move. We saw some ideas last time about ways that white can get positions that are really tough for black to defend, and they mainly sort of hinge off this idea of white just pushing on with e5 and trying to steamroll black. But instead of looking at e takes f4, I sort of went over everything I wanted to go over on that last time. We're going to look at the second most common move that black plays at the club level, d5. And I think this is black's strongest move in this position. We're going to see why to some degree here. So what we want to do here is we want to play f takes e5. Black is then going to want to play knight takes e4. There are a couple of different moves that white could do here, but my recommendation is to play queen f3. And this is an example coming up here where black has a couple of different options, so we're currently threatening to take twice on e4 and win a pawn, so black has to do something about that. Black has three main moves here, and the most common move by far is the worst of the three options. So black most commonly plays knight takes c3. 29% is common is this move knight c6, so much less frequent, and even much less frequent than that is this move f5. F5 is about 19% as common, so even more rare. Very rare that you'll see this. But I would say that this is actually black's strongest move, and we'll go over that in a bit. But for right now, I want to look at the most common move by black, knight takes c3. So here we want to take with the b pawn, just following the general rule that when they capture, or when we recapture, we want to recapture towards the center. Most common move here is bishop e7. I've heard other people say that there are other stronger moves here, notably c5, but according to the engine, and I think according to practice that I've seen, bishop e7 is at best marginally worse, if not on par with something like c5. So bishop e7, and in this case what we want to do is we want to push forward with d4 and take over the center to the extent that we can. Black will most likely play castles here, and we want to go bishop d3. They'll go c5, which is their main source of counterplay, trying to get some pressure on the d4 pawn. We go knight e2. They go knight c6, continuing their development, and we go castles with a slightly better position, but an easier position to play, I would say, for white. Both of white's bishops are aimed at black's kingside. White has the space advantage with the e5 pawn, and it has an easier attack, I would say. Their rook on f1 is open, just an easier position to play for white. Even though the computer is going to say this is only slightly better for white, I would much rather have white in this position. So that's sort of the main line that I would want to look at after black plays d5. So again, we take on e5, they take on e4, we play queen f3, and again, by far the most common move you're going to see is knight takes c3. We play b takes c3, and what we looked at there was bishop e7. I do want to mention a couple of other tries that you'll see. So the second most common move that you're going to see in this position from black is knight c6. And it turns out this is a mistake. And I'm going to go through a line here. And when we get to the end of the line, you might say, oh, well, white hasn't won material yet. You know, how was knight c6 a mistake? Basically, knight c6 is a mistake because black has stopped their ability to advance their c-pawn, which, as I said in the last position, was sort of a main source of counterplay for them, a way to put pressure on the pawn that white is eventually going to have on d4, and to try to get some play through the center and on the queen side. So here, after black plays knight c6, again, like in the last line, we want to take over the center with d4. And now here they play bishop e7, which, you know, they should have played in the last move, but now they've kind of put themselves behind the 8-ball a bit. We play bishop d3, they castle, and we go knight e2. And in this position, white just has a clear advantage. And again, there's no sort of material edge or anything here, but basically white has the same position they had last time, but black doesn't have any counterplay. You know, notably, black cannot push c5. Black cannot put pressure on d4. Black's going to have a much harder time generating some kind of play through the center and the queen side than we are on the king side. And if you look at the engine evaluation here, it's something like maybe like plus 1.5. I would have to go ahead and check it really. Yeah, like plus 1.9, 1.7, depending on, you know, how long you sort of let it sit. So yeah, this is why we study opening theory, and especially want to study, sort of approach things how I'm approaching it in this series. So if you looked at, you know, some course on the Vienna game, you might not see this move, knight c6, right? But this is the second most common move in this position. 72% of the time, people at the club level are playing this move. And you want to know that, hey, people frequently make this mistake here, and how do I take advantage? Okay, so after knight c6, the third most common move is bishop e6. About 61% as common as the main move, bishop e7. So after bishop e6, I would say, again, this is a slight inaccuracy. Bishop e7 would have been preferable here, or c5, as we'll see in a bit. But yeah, bishop e6, and then the best move I think white has here is a relatively uncommon move, knight h3. And a sample continuation would be something like queen h4 check, g3, queen g4, and queen e3. And in this position, black has a small advantage, but again, they're going to be able to push d4, probably sort of, you know, putting their bishop on d3, you know, or they may have to put it on g2 depending on sort of how long the queen stays at g4. But a small position or a small advantage that in practice it seems, you know, white has the better chances here, at least according to the database research that I did. So that's after move 6 bishop e6 for black. So outside of bishop e7, as I've mentioned, probably the other best try, probably equally good, some people say better than even bishop e7, is this move c5. And it seems to be the most challenging for white in a practical plays sort of situation. But the engine thinks it's about the same as bishop e7. So here we want to play queen g3, and this is going to be a common move you're going to see in some of these lines. Basically, the idea is to support the e5 pawn and to get out of the way from the knight coming to f3. Black plays knight c6. We play bishop b5. And again, this is as far as I want to go in the line. It's objectively equal according to the engine. It's about zeros. But white has better play, I would argue. Again, white has the space advantage, and white has quicker development. White's eventually going to have a rook on f1. I would much rather play white, even though again the computer is going to say this is basically equal. Okay, so if we step back and we return to our sort of starting position for this video of seeing what to do after black plays d5, let's sort of go through things again. F takes e5, knight takes e4, queen f3. I did mention that, again, the most common move that we've been going through is knight takes c3, but far less common, but better from a practice standpoint would be either knight c6 or f5 by black. So let's see sort of what to do against those moves. So knight c6, which again is like 29% as common, far less common than knight takes c3. We want to play bishop b5. And here black will take again on c3. And now we want to play d takes c3, allowing our c1 bishop to come into the game. After black has put their knight on c6, we want to take with the d pawn. If they haven't put their knight on c6, we want to take with the b pawn when they capture on c3. That's sort of a rule of thumb you might keep in mind. So next here is queen h4 for black, g3, queen e4 check. We capture on e4 and then play knight e2. This is an equal position. It's easier to play for black than, I would say, the positions that arise after knight takes c3. These are much easier positions to play for white. We went over those before, but the resulting position that we just got to after black plays knight c6, this position, I would say is easier to play for black, which is sort of speaks to why I think it's a stronger continuation for black than to play the main move that you'll see, knight takes c3. So it's something to be aware of, but you can take solace in the fact that it doesn't happen that often, and even when you do get to this position, this is objectively equal. White is not losing or anything like that. Okay, so after queen f3, again, we talked about knight takes c3 as being the main move. We just looked at knight c6. Let's look at what to do when they play the move that I would argue is probably black's best try here, f5. The first thing to note about this move is white does not want to play e takes f6 en passant. It's just a bad idea to be opening the line in front of your king tactically. Just a bad idea. I think the computer basically is going to say it's a mistake. So we don't want to take en passant, and that probably speaks to why this move is not so common by black, because I think a lot of people don't get, especially when they're playing the opening, a lot of people rattle out moves in the opening really fast. They don't think about them too much, but a lot of people might not play a lot of people might not play f5 as black because they think, oh, white can just take en passant and that's just going to screw up what I want to do here. But as it turns out, that would be a mistake for white to do, which totally justifies black playing f5. So here we want to play d3 as white, put some pressure on this knight and see what it's going to do. The most common reply here is for black to take. We take back, and then black has this strong move d4. And as in a previous line, white wants to play queen g3. Counterintuitively, we don't take on d4 because that's just inviting the queen into the party, black's queen into the party on d4. We don't want to do that. So we go queen g3. The most common move here, and again, not necessarily the best, maybe the best here is for black to play d takes c3. But the most common move here that you're going to see is knight c6. And again, I want to give you guys what people actually play as opposed to maybe what the best move is, because it's just more practical to look at what people actually play. Sometimes what people actually play is the strongest move, but oftentimes it's not. So knight c6. Against this, we want to go bishop e2. And again, most commonly, black does not play, takes c3, but they go bishop e6. And now we just want to shut things down with c4. And we get to an objectively equal position where you're just going to want to outplay your opponent. You don't have a worse position, but you have an objectively equal position. And that's what we kind of run into with something like the Vienna game generally. I think at the highest levels, it's not played so often because you can get to positions like this that are basically just equal, and grandmasters playing white will generally want to push for an edge. Their opponents will generally know these ways to equalize, relatively quickly, and maybe that sort of speaks to why at the grandmaster level that this opening is not played so often. But again, we're not grandmasters, right? And people at our level, people at the club level, are going to make a lot of mistakes, which I'm trying to point out in this opening, that are going to lead to the ability for you to get really strong positions really quickly. We've spoken to that a bit, but we're really going to see it in the videos coming up here. So yeah, what I've went through in this video again is just what do we do after black plays probably the strongest move, d5. We take, they take, and I'm recommending this move, queen f3. We looked at the line, the most common line, knight takes c3, but we also looked at the far less common lines, knight c6 and f5, which lead to basically equal positions, but are much more rare. Next time, we're going to continue on, and we're going to look at the third most common move that black plays, which is d6, and some other moves as well, which are commonly played but actually mistakes. So stay tuned for that, because again, as I've talked about even already through these videos, I want to give you guys not only what are the moves that black should play, but actually what are the moves that they play, and you want to stay tuned especially for the mistakes that they make. And we're really going to start to see these in the next video. We've seen them already a bit, but we're going to see them more and more in the next video. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.